This is Al making another video for BlueFirePoker. Today is part 4 of BlueFirePoker members Eric's review. Um, we've talked about what we're looking for in previous videos. Pre-flop, I think he's missing some open opportunities, particularly button and small blind. I've seen through reviewing his play, I think he's missing some isolation opportunities. Post-flop, we have an issue that we really haven't made much headway on, and that's value extraction when flopping top pair, top kicker. His win rate there is concerningly low, but yeah, I haven't found anything that's really showing me anything that's wrong there. Also, post-flop, we saw some win rate issues after the flop was checked around, and then after the turn was checked around, and his win rates there are quite low, but sample sizes are getting pretty small, and so variance becomes a much bigger factor. Um, there was also an issue of his play post-flop after calling a 3-bet. Win rate was pretty far off, but that gets into really small sample sizes. We're talking about an 85,000 sample size of a 4,600 play. So, and a lot of other things he does great. He does a great job with his facing turn and river bets. Facing a 4-bet play is great. Facing a 3-bet play, a little bit off, but not terribly off. Yeah, a lot of strong things about his game. Post-flop as a 3-better and as a squeeze better, his play is very strong. So let's go ahead and jump into the video. And this will probably be my last video for this review. We'll just get through as many hands as we can. So I believe this is where we left off in the last video, opening up ace-10 off. I started to talk about that and then realized my time was getting a little bit long. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about here is that when you have a player like the button here, who we open up wider against on the button when we're in the cutoff, because he has very small cold call range, very small a 3-bet range, that means that when we hit the flop, his ranges are going to be tighter because he's playing less hands, and so we've got to be very careful against him out of position. Now here we've got a gut shot. It's a reasonable expectation that we can fold out quite a few pocket pairs. I really feel like with his tight of a cold call, he probably doesn't have that many mid-suited connectors or like smaller suited aces. He might have some, but those don't matter too much because we already have them beat. But it doesn't hurt from like an equity standpoint to go ahead and get rid of those. Let me advance this video. Depending on how much he stabs, he doesn't really stab that much, 50% of the time versus a missed flop c-bet. So I don't think there's much of a case made for check calling here. I wouldn't be check calling in such a tight range. Now, here we do have a gutter to the nut straight draw. I would go ahead and bet here, but just in general, I'm going to be very cautious against this player. If I didn't have, a gut shot and an overcard here, I wouldn't be betting. Really, for me to bet this guy out of position, ideally I want something like 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw, 2 overs and a gut shot. This is about the worst I would see bet, and I'm not even sure this is good to c-bet because I'm also concerned with his low fold versus flop c-bet. We don't have a lot of information on him, but it makes sense. His ranges are tight, so he shouldn't be folding a lot. But when this number starts getting really low, it starts worrying me, does this guy fold pocket eights in a spot like this? And if I don't think this guy's folding pocket eights, then I think this is probably a bad bluff, although it does give us quite a bit more improvement equity. The problem is all our non-queen improvements, we are really not in a good spot to keep extracting value. We end up having to go into check mode and make a decision, and even though those hands beat pocket eights, we're not going to get a lot more money put in the pot, and if much more money does get put in the pot, we're not going to be real comfortable about it. But all that being said, I'm going to bet here, but I just want to make sure that you guys are taking into account what sort of ranges they're getting to these spots with. And if on a previous street we feel like a player is wide open to a lot of stealing, then that's going to mean that when he does call, he most likely does have a hand. Bottom table we have ace 10, which is a hand we're going to defend. Well, let's see here. Okay, so we defend ace 10, and we get a pretty good flop. We've got an overcard, we've got a backdoor flush draw, we got a flop texture such that a ton of his hands miss this, and so we've got to decide what is the play here. Check raise, check call, or donk. Now, my first thought in spots like this is I kind of like a donk here, and the reason being for that, the reason for that is that he has a low flop c bet, and so I feel like with this low of a flop c bet that he's going to check back a lot of air hands, even though this is a pretty good flop to bluff at. And there's a couple other things that I'm looking at that are making me think that he's checking air a lot and betting value a lot, because in today's games, a lot more guys are going with this lower flop c bet, and it's a question of how they're constructing their ranges. Are they doing it properly and checking more value hands in order to balance out their ranges, or are they just kind of being kind of nitty and just checking a bunch of air and betting value? And so I look at things like check fold frequency, which is the next number over. He has a 67% check fold, which is pretty high, especially for a low flop c bet. And so if he's check folding, of course this is out of position, and he's not out of position here, but it does give us an insight into how he plays. You can also go into the pop-up and look at his fold versus turn stab in position. So when he's in position on the flop, misses c bet, how much does he fold to a turn stab? And that'll give us a little bit more additional information. And if that number is high, then that's a little bit more evidence that he's checking air and betting value. The third number I like to look at here is fold versus flop raise. Now we have no information here, but if this number ended up being low, you say something around 40% or lower, that would be another piece of pretty strong information that this guy's mostly betting for value. So we really only have one piece of information, is check fold frequency. And I don't want to read too much into this, but it does make me think that his c bet is fairly value heavy here. And I feel like a check call here is probably is probably not a profitable check call here. I'd like to see a little bit more information to confirm that, but that would be my initial read here. Now, the last consideration, this is something I've been thinking about a ton more this year. In fact, it's probably the thing I've been thinking about most recently, is what is the value of just checking here, folding to a bet, but then being able to profitably stab the 40 or 45% he doesn't c bet. And I did some rough math on it, and it was surprisingly profitable, even when you consider the equity giveaway, allowing him to see that free turn card. Especially when you got a hand like this that can also benefit from the equity giveaway. If he's checking back with some value hands like 2s through 8s, and then our ace through 10 is live, we gain a little bit. We actually gain a lot from that equity giveaway. I actually would be okay with checking this, folding to a bet, and then just trying to steal it on the turn if he checked. Now, but as a default though, from what little I see here, I like a donk better, just because I feel like he's going to be checking back here and just taking free equity quite a bit. But my recent work on going for the turn stab makes me think that I may be wrong there. Let's see what he ends up doing. Okay, in the top hand, our c bet didn't work, and so now we're on the turn. Now he bets. I think it's a pretty easy check fold. Okay, so it looks like he's going to check call here. I don't really like that. And now he donks the turn. Okay, now I I am kind of a fan of the check call lead turn donk, but this player's wrong for it. I use the check call turn donk against high flop c better, low turn barrel type of players, and it would be hands like this, and because I need this guy to have a decent amount of air in his range for this to work for me. I mean, I know I now picked up the gutter, but that's some equity, but it's not a lot. Maybe the ace has some equity to it. But if I've already kind of leaning towards the size, this guy's c-bet is fairly value heavy, I don't think I'm going to get enough folds here to justify the turn donk with my equity only being 4 outs. Now, let's say I turned a heart. Then I've got the ace, potential ace outs plus the hearts out. That's a lot more equity, and that makes it a better turn bet. Plus, the heart would act as a scare card, and might get him off of some one pair hands. And so, but this queen, I don't think is going to scare him that much. Certainly, gives credit for king queen or maybe some 10 jacks, but that's going to be a pretty big stretch to convince him of. And I'm really not that interested in trying to do a turn plus river play here. His showdown frequency, it looks like, is 29%. That's a pretty high showdown. Those are typically not guys that I'm going to try to make combo moves against, especially when I'm giving him credit for having a hand to start with. All right, so table 1, we go ahead and go extended value against a recreational player who's playing a ton of hands. But we've already established that this player has, at least over this sample size, a pretty high fold versus 3-bet, 71%. So if he is a recreational player, he's an unusual recreational player in that he folds a lot. Yeah, this is a bit of contradictory information for me, because I would pretty much auto-assume that recreational players don't fold versus 3-bet. So I would start to doubt maybe he's not that much of a recreational player, and maybe it's just sample size, although 546 hands, that's a pretty big stretch. I go back. I think it's more likely he's just a recreational player that doesn't call a lot of 3-bets. And so for that reason, I think king-queen would be a much better call here. It's too strong of a hand to bluff with. Now, I would want to take hands that aren't good enough to call against this guy. Weaker suited aces, maybe offsuit aces, maybe mid-suited connectors. 3-bet bluff him with those hands, and then go ahead and call a hand like ace queen, king queen. I don't see much of a point of turning hands that are potentially good cold call hands into bluffs here. We just ended up check folding the river there, which I think is probably the right choice. I mean, you could give some consideration to bombing the river, but I typically don't like to make people fold hands, particularly when their hands can be fairly nutted. This is not a classic spot where his range is capped. His range is uncapped. He could have quad nine here, for all we know. So I tend to, in my game today, I tend to put a lot of pressure on my opponents when I feel like the ranges are capped to one pair hands. But if the ranges are uncapped, yeah, I'm not going to do that. So I think we made the correct play on the river. All right, so top hand here. Now this kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the very beginning of this video with the ace-10 hand. Is we have a player that seems to fold a lot, and so typically we would be c-betting here. We've got 2 overcards. We've got a 10 or ace going to give us a gut shot or an open-ended straight draw. But man, I mean, I'm probably going to bet here. I am going to bet here, but this is about as low a value as I'm willing to go in a spot like this. See what happens. Yeah, table 4, queen 10 off. He opened to 3x and appears to be really, really tight. I probably would have popped up his and looked at his button opening just to see how much he's opening on the button. Um, I'm not against a 3x open. And that it would depend on what I saw. Um, if I saw this guy opening up, I don't know, under 40% on the button, I might just fold this hand. I'm not. This is getting an unusual situation. A player playing this tight and opening to 3x. I'm not quite sure what would be the bottom of my offsuit range. I mean, I wouldn't call queen 9. Queen 10 is very borderline for me here. But I would like to see him look for that additional piece of information. Okay. So table 3, we call pre-flop with 7s, and we're faced with a c-bet. Now, once again, we're working with very limited information here, but this player doesn't open up a lot of hands, and they don't c-bet very much. I would actually fold here, just because if this player's bluffing, they probably have 6 outs, and they're going to be able to see the turn end river for the same price. If they bet on the turn, I mean, what are we going to do on the turn? Additionally, one of our outs is the 7 of spades, and you know, we're not going to be jumping up and down if we catch a 7 of spades, especially if this player's going to be keeps wanting to put money in the pot. I mean, we're not going to fold, but you know, when half your improvement outs also make the flush, and I'm not sitting here scared of them having the flush. What I'm scared about is that only better hands put a lot of money in when the flush gets made. So the 7 of spades either beats us or it kills our action, and that is something I definitely take into consideration here. When half your outs are tainted, that is a fairly serious consideration. But I would just fold here on the flop. This player's tight. It's unlikely with their combination of opening frequency and c-bet frequency they're taking advantage of us, and so we can afford to play exploitably in a spot like this versus a player like this. Yeah, table 2, kind of interesting spot. What happened is under the gun min open, we called, and then the small blind min re-raised. And now we got this going on, and we've got a flush draw. And just based on the numbers, it looks like it's all against recreational players. Maybe number 2 is not a recreational player. Yeah, I would go ahead and call here, simply because it's not possible, since this guy it's just a small re-raise. These guys can't jam in. Although I don't care about the first guy jamming. I'm more concerned about the second guy jamming in. I think we'll go ahead and call here with with the odds we're getting, and see if we can hit a 6 or a club on the turn and see what the other players do. Also, I think a fold would be fine too. Okay, table number 4, they c-bet, high c-bet. Now this is, I was talking about out of position floating, something I'm doing a lot more of. This is a spot where I would consider an out of position float. I would need some more data, but this player has a high flop C bet, low turn barrel. And that's the number one thing I'm looking for when I'm looking for a light float opportunity. Plus, I have some back doors here. I've got two overcards, a jack's going to give me an open and a straight draw. But I don't have enough information to do this. Plus, my opponent's starting ranges are pretty tight, and so I do expect them to be c-betting a decent amount. But if you're looking for out-of-position floats, this is the combination you're looking for. Not like over here where it's the opposite, 58 on the flop, 67 on the turn. High on the flop, low on the turn. That's your out-of-position float combination. But like I said, I don't have enough information. His opening ranges are too tight for me. Yeah, that was a good fold on the turn. Yeah, it looks like I was wrong. Here we clearly took down the pot, so they are able to bluff. But you know, we got to go with the numbers we have, and this guy's at the extreme end of low frequency opens and c bets, and so yeah, it's not like they can never bluff. It's just a question of, are they bluffing at a frequency that we can do something about? What happened here on table 4? Did he go for a check raise? Yeah, I would need to see more information. I'm concerned because this player's starting ranges are so tight that we're just not getting enough folds here. But whenever I go for a check raise with this type of hand, I'm talking about like a backdoor type of hand, which is this absolutely is. I've got to see a fold versus raise of around 50% to justify my play. And we obviously have no information on that, but I just think it's a mistake to battle against these ranges, because if this guy's range is tight, we're going to put ourselves in a pretty bad spot, because 3 of our outs are tainted, which would be the third spade. And let's say we do get like a jack out on the turn, we bet the turn, this guy doesn't fold. Well, we don't, I mean, what do we do on the river? Do we go ahead and try to take him off his flush draw on the river if we miss on the river? Or are we done at that point? But even if we catch like a queen or 10 on the turn against this guy's tight starting ranges, I mean, how good a shape are we in? We just I hate playing in spots where I just have no idea where I'm at, and I honestly would have no idea where I'm at unless I actually runnered the nuts. And I just don't like to put myself in spots like this. I would much prefer a check call over a check raise, but I probably just check fold here. Yeah, so I'm just curious what this player c-bet with king 10. So yeah, it was an air c-bet, and you know, like I said, we're working with small sample sizes, and so their true frequencies could be, you know, significantly different from that. But we can't make calls wondering if their numbers, and I know I've talked about this in previous videos, but I'll take a minute to talk about this now. Is the more extreme the numbers are, the more they're off of norms, the more that we can trust them, or the more we should give them weight over small sample size. Now, I don't want to base a lot of my play on a 72-hand sample size, but you know, we have a player playing a non-full stack. Their spread between the VPIP and PFR is huge. I mean, the most likely explanation is this player is a passive recreational player. Now, this may prove to be not true. But with the pre-flop raise and with the flop C bet being at the extreme low end, and just going with pure probabilities, we can say they can't bluff. Now, obviously, they did bluff in this situation, which now that we know that, maybe we need to kind of mentally add a little bit to these numbers and give them a little bit more credit for bluffing. But without seeing that, I can't. I'd make the same play again, just based on what we have now. If a player is just a little bit on the low side over a small sample size, I completely ignore it and just play normal poker. But these numbers are at the extremes, and this is where HUDs are at their most valuable, when players' numbers are at the extreme, when they're playing a lot of hands, raising a lot of hands, folding a lot of hands, and they're way out there on the extremes. That's where HUDs are the most valuable, and this player's obviously at the extremes. All right, so let's see what happens here on table 4. I mean, I think we have to be done at this point. Yeah, good. We isolate the limper with jacks. I think 5x out of position, a little bit on the big side. I think that was 5x. Yeah, I'd rather just stick to 4x. I think 5x just starts forcing too many folds. Yeah, table 3, we've got an underpair on the board. Yeah, I like the fold. Yeah, the table 4, the opponent had bottom pair plus a flush draw. We could have definitely taken him off that hand, but based on the information we have, I wouldn't have wanted to try that. I would definitely isolate table 1. Yeah, I think we're missing out on those weaker aces, weaker ace isolations. They definitely work, or at least just complete. If you don't feel fine isolating, the complete will also work. At table 4, if I was heads up against the big blind, I would see bet bluff, not against 2 players. Someone's going to have some little piece of that, and I just don't have anything going from my back door that I can fire multiple bullets with. Obvious C bet here. Now, I can't see the rest of this player's head because it got cut off in the recording, but assuming their turn and river's lowish like the flop, this is a spot where I'd go for larger sizing. If I have a value hand, my opponent doesn't like to fold. If my normal C bet is, say, 70%, I'm going to go 75, 78%, something like that. Table 1, Definite C bet. Also against these weak recreational players, pretty easy just to go 60% on your bluffs. I don't like this double barrel. I really don't like the double barrel because I think the only thing we fold out is hands that we beat, and we just don't. Okay, let's think about this. Yeah, I didn't pause soon enough to see if the guy. I wanted to talk about this before I knew what he did. But I mean, my initial thought was, first off, I don't double barrel, but then I wanted to think about, if I double barreled, then how do I feel about the river barrel? Well, as a general rule, I don't try to push recreational players off their hand. Now, I talked about this in this first video, is I've been rethinking that a little bit because my brother does quite well playing the mid stakes, and feels like he does a really good job of finding spots where he can push recreational players off of hands, and his results speak for themselves. But it's really hard to know. You can't filter for river bluffs against recreational players. I wish you could. So it's just a feeling on his part. But his overall results are really strong, so he's probably correct. But yeah, and I'm still kind of working my way through this. But I mean, I've just had a lifelong rule of, against recreational players, I take lots of smallish bluff stabs against them, but then I don't follow through without really good equity. And here we had really poor equity. We had a card we could rep, but I just don't think we can try to rep hands against recreational players. Now, we already know he called, so we lost. But yeah, my instant thought was no. And I say no both on the turn and on the river with this low of equity. Now, let's say we did have diamonds on the turn. Sure, we got a ton of equity. We got the ace out, probably the 5 out, and of course diamonds. But here we've got maybe the ace out, maybe the 5 out, and that's just not enough in this situation. Oh wow, the guy backdoored his flush. All right, so table 4, we've got a 2 Broadway hand against a button men open. I'm personally calling these in the small blind. Now, I don't have data to support if a hand this week is a good cold call, but what data I do have does support it, but I just don't have enough to be sure of it. But I really feel like against the smaller opening sizes, players are just way under defending. And I think there's just been this thought in poker for a long time since there's been poker. Don't play a bunch of hands out of position without the initiative in the pot. And I think for a long time when games were soft, guys could give up along those spots and still win. Now, and so I think that we have historically underdefended our blinds from cold calling. Now, we have the additional factor today of, especially in the last year, of players opening up to smaller sizes, obviously on the button, but in the games I play, the mid-stakes games, guys are doing it a lot more in other positions too. And one of the things I've noticed is a lot of players are not changing their cold call ranges despite getting better odds and implied odds on their hands, when obviously they should be. And I think in the small blind, particularly in the small blind versus these button opens, I mean, if a button is opening up 55 or 60% of hands, I'm certain, I feel certain that a queen 10 suited would be profitable. Now, what about a queen 10 off? I don't know. I mean, it's a complex issue, and I don't know if you could even figure it out with like Card Runners EV. I'm not good at Card Runners EV at all. The way I just do it is just raw data. Give me a big enough sample size. Let me take a look at the results of players who have cold call hands like this in this exact spot. But the problem is I need massive sample sizes, because not a lot of players are calling light here, and I mean, you just need a big sample size anyway just to get good results. But I'm thinking that you can call here. Now, of course, if the big blind is a reg, people worry about getting squeezed off their hand, but most players are just not squeezing that much. It of course hurts the value of calling here, but most players just aren't squeezing enough that it eats up how good your range does against the button's 55 or 60% opening range. Oh, good. He calls. He thought about three betting. I would have led. I would lead here. You've got a gut shot to the basic nuts. You are against three players, but I think there's enough ace and king high hands that you can take out there. Probably twos through fours, twos and threes. That's not many combos, but you can take some of those out. But yeah, you got good equity against one pair hands, and if you catch your straight, you might get paid decent for it too. That's a little bit of a close call. I know he min did it. Min re-raised. Sorry, I'm trying to pause this. But the problem is, I don't think a player like this is messing around that much. I mean, if he had the biggest problem is his incredibly short stack and the terrible implied odds it gives you. Now with this overbet, yeah, I mean, this goes back to bluffing recreational players like this, and it's possible, but yeah, I'm just not into it yet. Actually, what I would have done here, and I thought you were initially going to do it, is I would do a block bet here. I'd bet $1 into $5. And the reason for that is I do want to push this guy off of, like an ace, queen, ace, jack type of hand. I don't know if I would, but maybe I would. But I also want to make sure that I want to try to get to the a river cheap. And so, if I can get him to call $1 instead of betting $2.50 or $3 himself, that's obviously going to be savings for me because I got a ton of equity here, and I want to make sure I can see that river card for a good price. I mean, there's nothing wrong with here because we have so much equity here, but it's just a question of would like a blocking bet $1, $1.50 gives a little bit better results here than overbetting the pot. I think both probably work given our equity, but I like my line a little bit better. Back up there, he made a pretty tight fold. Okay, so table one, Jack 10 off against a 3x open. This would be a standard defense for me. Now, I would be looking a little bit at my opponent, and just seeing what he's doing. So he's not folding versus raises, so there's no exploitability there. Um, he does have a highish flop C bet, lowish turn C bet, not terribly low, but enough that I feel like, you know, if I want to do some out of position floating, that would be an option there for me. In my badge system, I also have a fold versus a donk bet badge, so I'd be able to see if he's exploitable there. I would only fold Jack 10 off against a 3x open if he was short, or if he played really tough post flop. And this guy's his fold versus raise is a little bit low for my taste. So that's kind of in the category of playing tough. But with his lowish turn barrel, yeah, he doesn't play tough enough that I feel like I couldn't call here. I think folding here is a mistake. Although this player's play against the button open is overall really strong, so I don't want to question it too much. But this is just too tight of a fold for me. Yeah, I probably would have tried to bluff that turn. I would try to bluff this river. Your jack high, you actually would have been bluffing with the best hand, but because and I really haven't been looking as close as I should. But one of the issues I thought was this player's betting frequency when the previous streets was checked around. And that's one of the highest fold frequency spots we have in the game. How often players will fold after they've lost the initiative in the hand. Either they checked instead of bet, or they didn't bet when you checked. And most players are folding around 65% of the time in spots like that. You've got to, of course, take their tendencies into consideration, the board texture into consideration. But if the average fold frequency is 65% when the previous street got checked around, and a 2/3 pot bet, ignoring your equity, a 2/3 pot bet needs a 40% fold to break even. I mean, that's a huge gap between average fold frequency and the needed break-even fold frequency. And the vast majority of regs are going to be in between that 40 and 65%, which means that as a default, you need to be betting those spots in order to take advantage of that. Now, if the opponent tendencies plus the board texture indicate to you that that's a really bad bet, yeah, I'm not saying bet 100% of the time, but without a compelling reason why you shouldn't, then you do need to be betting. Okay, so we 3-bet here. Now this player, now I would have liked it if he would have, because we have enough hands on this player to look and see how much this player folds versus a 3-bet positioning. At least get some indication of it. But I don't mind this because we do have that situation where this guy has, I wonder if this is the same guy we talked about before. I don't think so. But this guy has that high fold versus flop C bet, 50% fold on the flop in a 3-bet pot. Now, ace-jack is to the bottom of the range I'm going to use to take advantage of this. I much prefer suited ace-jack, suited ace-10. And so I have those backdoor flush possibilities. But I think this is fine, given the information we see here. But once you have enough hands, I definitely think you should be looking positionally here. And I also worry a little bit about, and my current HUD has isolation raise frequencies here, and I'd be very curious just to look at that and see if this guy isolates differently than he opens, because a lot of guys will isolate quite a bit tighter than they open. I actually isolate probably a little bit wider than I open in spots like this, because I just think you get more credit, plus you're isolating a weak player. But not necessarily everybody does that, and so if his opening range ends up being tighter, that means that he's probably folding even less, and that might be enough to make this a bad 3-bet, or a bad isolation 3-bet. Yeah, I've got kings, bottom right. Kings is a squeeze, so the bet size is fine. We hit trips. Yeah, the guy's not deep at all, so there's no reason to really push it. But we can't let him get away with that. Now, top table number one, you absolutely have to c-bet here. We've got 2 overs. We don't like the board texture. A player with a wide calling range is going to connect with us fairly often, but you know, we can probably get this guy off of like king queen type of hands, maybe ace queen without a club. With a 50% fold frequency, I don't think this guy's going to be doing a lot of like ace queen no club type floating. All we got to do is throw like 750 into 14 here, and we should make money long term, but this is not the board texture we were looking for. Table 2, when a player takes a line like this, he's pretty much nutted. But just in case he's not, I just prefer to call here. Now, if the board was dry, I'd probably just go ahead and jam it in. But with the board being dry, no draws available, I just flat here because we're going to be able to get it in on the turn, super easy. And so I think if you jam here, you almost always get his money. But there might be a few silly bluffs here that you might go ahead and keep in there if you flat here and let him jam the turn. Yeah, good call. See, yeah. Yeah, nothing. Yeah, I hope we're not going to check on table one. Yeah, I think that's a mistake. I mean, I know the board texture's not ideal, but I think with a little bit more. Sorry, I paused the recording instead of paused the replayer. With with a stickier player, I would give them more credit for floating with like ace queen type high, you know, pocket 5 stuff like that. With a high fold frequency, I think we get the small pairs to fold. I think we get ace queen to fold. Now, of course, I think I mentioned king queen before. We don't really care about that, but I mean, we really don't want to be playing an out of position game and check calling with ace jack. So I kind of threw the king queen, getting the king queen to fold there, just kind of an ease of life type play, where I'd rather bet than check, and then cause I just don't feel like I'm going to be check calling with this hand of this board texture. If the board texture was much worse, say instead of a 2, maybe the card was like a 7, you know, something like that. I might be a little bit less likely to bet here, but I think the board texture is bad, but not bad enough for me to check. All right, we'll finish these round of hands, and this will be it for this video. Yeah, table 1, you got to fold now. I mean, I have a hard time believing that we're beat here, but he could definitely be protecting some sort of pocket pair, and he could even be betting a hand like ace queen with a club maybe that actually beats us. So yeah, there's nothing else to do there, but I think a flop c bet was the play. Yeah, we flop trips. We'll end with this trip hand down here. That was it. All right, well, once again, guys, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, critiques, comments, put them in the comments and I'll address them there. I don't have time today to do another video, but I have just enough time on the recording that I probably could do one more. Yeah, I don't know if this will be my last one or maybe there'll be a 5th one. I'll see what my time is like in the next day or two. And if I find the time, I'll probably do a 5th one. If not, that'll be the end of this series. All right, guys, as always, thanks for listening. Good luck out there.